Hello, I'm Danielle Casey with the Albuquerque Regional Economic Alliance. AREA serves the four-county region in greater Albuquerque to attract and expand and grow jobs for the purpose of diversifying the economy and raising the quality of living for everyone in the community. Not an easy task. Today, we are going to be talking about business development and the critical items that we are going to need to attract more firms to our community. And I'm very excited because with me today is our very own Senior Vice President for Economic Development and Business Development, in particular at AREA, Chad Matheson. Thanks for coming, Chad.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Not that you had a choice. We kind of work together. Chad, please tell us a little bit about yourself and also the business development and research team, which you lead for AREA, and really what your team is tasked with.
Absolutely. So Chad Matheson, I head up the business development and economic research teams at AREA. With that comes a lot of responsibility around project management, economic competitiveness research, and really understanding where we are in a comparative context to other metropolitan regions that we compete with for inward investment opportunities. So my background is in economic research, and with that, we're able to add a lot of value for our strategic initiatives that we've launched uniquely around site readiness, as is the topic of our conversation this morning.
Absolutely. Well, the work that you and the business development team, of course, everybody at AREA does important work in the community, especially our board of directors and what they're out there doing and championing. But you all are uniquely tasked with responding to client inquiries. When a company wants to come into the market, you're the ones that are figuring out what they need. If they have a requirement, they need 100 acres and they need power demands and they're looking at talent and workforce, you all are responding to that, connecting with them with the resources, providing that regional approach. And all of this fits really critically into our strategic plan in the target industries that we're trying to attract and the things that we're trying to grow in the community. And one of the key pieces I always love to remind people of our goal in our strategic plan is to make our market more competitive so we can raise that quality of life for folks. And that means we have to increase our job growth rate, which means we need to keep more companies, grow more companies, and bring new ones in. But the reality is there's obstacles. Tell me about, and I know you could come up with many, but tell me a little bit about the top obstacle you are seeing when you're talking to clients and opportunities, because we all agree that everyone should want to come to New Mexico. That's not the issue, right? It's a wonderful place. What keeps us from getting all the jobs we want?
Absolutely. Well, I think your point is spot on in terms of the intent of our approach is to improve the economic environment so that we're more competitive for quality economic investments. And to do that, what we've centered around are what we've like to call economic enablers. So that can be things like sites and buildings, product and inventory that are made available and ready for investment so they can get off the ground more quickly. But also things like workforce and talent development. So making sure that we are developing the types of people that these prospective companies will need in line with their ramp-up schedule, but then also, introducing new concepts to the regulatory environment, and so streamlining some processes and aligning our objective on what we're seeking to accomplish in an economic context. But I'm going to loop this back around to product and inventory, sites and real estate. I mean, right now, the impediment to receiving some of these investments is a function of speed to market. Companies want to be up and running quickly, or at least competitively with states around the country. And what I mean by that is not only competitively against Arizona and Texas, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, but also Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, and the Southeast in general. So what we manage in terms of market-driven demand are competitive economic development projects. And when we say competitive economic development projects, we mean they are nationally competitive. And so we are in competition with states and regions for these types of investments.
Well, and you get to go to, get to is a nice term. You are often tasked with having to go to site selection conferences and along with, several dozen other economic developers with great value propositions, getting in front of site selection consultants and telling them why they should be in our community and market. And I know one of the recent things that we've cited quite a bit is the Site Selectors Guild, which does an annual report. And I think 79% of them said that for manufacturing projects, sites and inventory, site readiness, is their number one issue, followed closely by workforce, and then of course things like utility and power demands. So these are real challenges that if we want to win for the community, it's not just about smiles and sunshine, it's about
100%.
being able to deliver. So let's talk a little bit more, because I think when people hear site readiness, it can mean different things to a lot of folks. So when we're talking about it in our context, in a perfect world, I think about site readiness as first a community, whether it's a state, a locality, or private developer, really understanding truly the highest and best use for their property, right? We think that this property would be most suited for warehousing and logistics, or we think it would be most suited for manufacturing. And then we can also understand the target industries through our research, all the deep dive research that we conduct and have conducted. And then further figuring out how to advance that. Can you dig into a little bit more of the definitions of site readiness from your seat at leading business development for a region?
Well, I think for us and for me, it's understanding your product, like you said, and how it aligns to your potential customer. So, think about it in a private market context. We purchase products and services that align with our consumer behavior needs. From an economic perspective, we have the same responsibility. We have to create our product in line with what the customers are going to want. And so those customers might be warehousing logistics, they might be aerospace component manufacturers, they might be data centers. But the attributes of our sites and real estate have to line up in a way that complement their growth objectives as a corporate entity. And so oftentimes you'll see requirements related to due diligence characteristics by site. And so having a kind of a standard template of characterization, a characterization form of your land and parcels within the region to understand the gaps that exist and where you might need to kind of fill in those gaps so that you're more ready. So I think oftentimes when we talk about site readiness, there's an intrinsic notion to think about, laying roads and putting pipes in the ground, but there's also important due diligence around archaeological reports and phase one environmentals and kind of the soft due diligence that complements pre-development work, but still expedites their speed to market because it needs to be done before the facility's built in and of itself. So making an assessment of properties within the region to see what has been completed by site, so we understand what's the highest and best use for funding to help close some of those gaps, is a really important exercise for our inventory assessment as it relates to sites and real estate around the region, because they're going to be different by site.
Absolutely, and I don't think we can even possibly count the amount of times where we've gotten a requirement and said, okay, they're looking for 50 acres. Well, we've got a dozen locations that have 50 acres that say they're pretty much ready to go. Unfortunately, that requirement may need 20 megawatts of power, and with further due diligence, we finally learned that that's not something that the utility can deliver in 6 months.
No.
Because there are requirements for transmission and other investments. So just because you have the dirt in the ground doesn't mean it's ready. And if you haven't even done the front end analysis, you don't even know if you can answer their questions in a timely manner. So
That's right.
and then when we look at the site readiness process, there's that initial understanding of what makes sense for your community, the research on what it would cost to get it up and running, and then also thinking about, great, can you make some preliminary investments or at least have a funding mechanism to where when you have that end user, it's very clear to them on who's paying for what, and they can actually look at that and say, yes, this is cost effective in my pro forma. You wouldn't start a small business without a business plan, understanding what it's going to take to be profitable, and no one doing a project turning dirt in the ground is going to do that either. Right. The way we look at it is is that competitive against the other markets, just like you said, right?
100%. And I can tell you that when prospects are evaluating the region, what they don't like is surprises.
Right.
Right. So for us to be very clear on the front end, or at least transparent on the front end, to say, here are the development gaps that exist by site that align with your investment parameters, that goes a long way in how we can engage with the prospect, because at least it's not an unknown. Those unknowns increase the amount of risk that a company would have to take. And again, we're solving for being faster, reducing risk, and being simpler in our approach to economic investment opportunities. And so we have to address those three attributes across our method of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So as an economic developer, I always like to say everyone thinks that it's economic development's a crazy mystery. I always tell everyone the only time it really is a crazy mystery is when we're dealing with a client that's at a confidentiality stage. Otherwise, we are an open book. We really want to help each other. And economic developers across the country and globally, I have found to be extremely helpful, wonderful partners. So we tap into them quite a bit. And another bit of the research that you've been doing, a pretty big lift actually, some really wonderful interns from UNM, other members of the team, have been looking at who's doing it well, what states or markets are really great examples that we can look to emulate and maybe take some of those great ideas that they've implemented and figure out a New Mexico way. Give me a couple examples that you have found to be the most interesting.
Absolutely, and to set the stage, I mean, in that process of research, we found that 36 states have some form of state, local, or regional site readiness program in place. So the breadth of program availability to review is pretty tremendous. Some of my favorites, though, and I'll go east to west gradually, and I'll start with the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. They are very aggressive in their site readiness development fund, and this year just earmarked $126 million for their site development fund. What they do is just what we had mentioned. They start in kind of a characterization mode, so they assess the property to identify the gaps, and then there's a development fund where that property can go forward and say, we're applying for funding to close X, Y, or Z gap. That could be anything from grading or tree removal or utility installation, anything that fits in the program, anything that fits within the program requirements can be potentially eligible for that funding. So they're definitely a best practice and a nationwide leader. The second is the state of Tennessee, another tremendous and well-defined state level program, and their minimum threshold site criteria is about 20 acres. So they're able to do development work on functionally smaller parcels, which helps build density in both urbanized areas and in rural communities, should there be kind of a rural industrial park opportunity.
And that's important too. It affects urban and rural communities.
100%. And the investment opportunity for a rural community is going to functionally be different than what an urban area would be competitive for, just by the nature of workforce availability. So the types of industries that you're competitive for are going to be different depending on your market conditions and your labor force dynamics. The last one I'll mention, it isn't quite necessarily a formalized program, but the state of Arizona. They're able to reimburse up to 80% of public infrastructure for manufacturing projects.
To a local municipality.
To a local municipality. So in a scenario where municipalities can be more aggressive on funding the development of public infrastructure, having that reimbursement mechanism back to them allows for a more proactive approach in how they want to develop their land for export-oriented manufacturers.
Fantastic. One of the things I always like to throw in here as well is reminding anybody who's not as familiar with economic development practices are definitely areas support for the importance of projects that create an economic return. So I think a lot of times people in the community don't realize the dramatic return on investment that these projects bring. So when a base industry job, especially one in a high-tech sector comes in, for every base industry job they could create the multiplier effect of anywhere between 2 and 7 additional jobs. So that means that company coming in creates demand for restaurants, entertainment,
Absolutely.
lawyers, dentists,
Yeah.
anyone that is servicing any of those folks because they are creating and bringing net new wealth into the market. And we can actually calculate those returns and look at that investment. And the reality is, without that investment, you get none of those returns.
Right.
So I always think that's important to point out when we're thinking about why should our state invest in public infrastructure? Why should our communities be involved in this? Because we want our kids to stay here and have job opportunities and career growth, and we want our community to improve. We want people to have better better life cycles and really just grow overall.
We are after a vibrant economic environment. I mean, that is the goal, and in the process to be helpful in proving what that future scenario can look like, we can produce those ROIs. So based on investment profile A, here's the projected 5-year return to state and local tax revenues just across those two variables. As you mentioned, the increase in consumer expenditures is a multitude higher than that just because of what happens within the local economic environment because of new employees coming in and spending their paychecks within the local environment. And so that is a very helpful piece of evidence to bring to the conversation when we're organizing around this conversation to develop this shared priority.
Yeah. And we'll save it for another day on a deep dive on the amazing and wonderful impact and the work that's going on around talent development, so we can deliver that talent, and also how those dollars go back to the local community. So I always like to say that economic development's role, or at least the role of economic developers and EDOs like ours in addressing things like education and community safety and other issues, is to work to remove pathways that are keeping companies out of the community. Because typically, as we've already discussed, if they can't find a site that's going to fit their needs, that's competitive, then we're out of the list. They don't even reach the talent or the community quality of life or safety issues if we can't at least start by finding a location for them. And many of them know that they're part of a community when they move into a community. I'm very excited, for example, about Ebon Solar. They are creating a major investment, and we had a direct conversation with their CEO and talked about they're going to be a great community steward, and they know that because of their investment, they're going to have a sizable impact on our market overall, and they're excited to do it. So this really matters.
It does. And even just to kind of build on that point, there was even an announcement last year for a durable goods manufacturer, and in the process, this was one that actually took down an existing facility. So we had a facility available, it was a historical facility that they had to invest into for some modernization. But I think that's just it, right? There was an existing facility that they were able to take down, and the secondary conversation became about, okay, how can I tap into workforce supply? And so our responsibility in that conversation was illustrating drive time dynamics by occupational category to showcase to their chief HR, here's where density of people live and their willingness to commute to work. And so that level of conversation is happening, but it does happen at a secondary phase after a site or facility has been identified.
Absolutely. So it's a deep process.
Work.
It is fun work. It's really exciting. So let's talk a little bit now as we wrap it up on, great, if anybody's hearing this and going, absolutely, we completely agree, let's get site ready, let's bring all these things. At high level, I think there's a couple of things that need to happen, and then I would love you to weigh in. Obviously, a site readiness investment at our state level, something commensurate with what we're seeing other states doing that are having success and seeing strong return on investment. So I'm very hopeful that we will see something move forward in state budget, move forward in next session for approval that funds a site readiness effort to do the work we all described, we described earlier. The second leg of that stool, as I've been describing it, is the regulatory process. We can always do better on permitting and timelines because time is money. Speed to market is money. Even for when we find a great client, and we had one earlier this year, Spring Oaks Capital. They're doing office operations. They have folks doing customer service center type jobs. And big kudos to the city of Albuquerque that really jumped in to make sure that their permitting was very quick because that mattered to them in their whole business plan. It's one of the reasons they selected our community above others nationally. So even if site readiness is not an issue, permitting and timeframes are. And then lastly, we have talked about the need to figure out a very sizable way or a very important way for our utilities to be proactive. Right now, there are a lot of regulations that, for very good reason, prevent our utilities, especially our power utility, from doing things like saying, we think a big company will go in that site, so we want to order equipment and transformers now. They can't do that now because, obviously, we want to make sure it doesn't affect the ratepayer. And thank you, as a ratepayer.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. It's a big deal. But I think that there's always a solution, and I know that there are folks out there looking for ways that there could either be funding or a mechanism or a program to allow them to speed up their processes and become more proactive as well, because so many of these opportunities are really leaning on those utilities who are working very hard. So all three of those, anything I left out that you want to touch on to add a little bit of color to it?
I think leading with yes is a good attribute to embody as an economic developer and one who participates in the economic environment, because there are solutions that can be created. It might take creativity, but the reality is everyone agrees that a prosperous economic environment is important. And so how we create that as influencers of our own organizations and ecosystems, we must develop shared priorities, and that's one of them. So thinking about ways that we can unlock the ability for a utility partner to preemptively purchase equipment for installation without passing off a rate increase to the resident population. Like, that's important, and that's not the expectation that they would do. So we're working to solve for how do they not do that?
Right,
And,
exactly.
And that's important to understand. But in terms of the economic solution, I think that's a good one to consider, because there is a larger infrastructure need for the region.
Yes.
A lot of that is backbone electrical infrastructure, like you had mentioned. A lot of it's roadway infrastructure as well,
Absolutely.
to our bigger sites.
Fiber.
Gas, water, and so thinking about ways in which there can be a macroeconomic fund to support utility development that encourages inward investment, but is focused on a much bigger picture, I think is a critical element in this conversation as well. Whereas a lot of what we've talked about previously is that pre-development fund, a lot of the smaller soft due diligence items that encourage speed to market, but that backbone infrastructure is going to be a critical element of our success over the next decade as well.
Absolutely. None of these three things are successful without the others.
They build on one another. Absolutely. Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Chad, thank you.
Thank you.
We are so grateful to have you on the area team and everyone on the team. Clearly, we're doing amazing work that I'm very proud of.
We are.
And grateful for your expertise. We've been out there talking to a lot of partners, so we're not trying to think about this issue in a vacuum. We've been working with all of the chambers across the state, our statewide New Mexico chamber, other industry associations, community partners. So I think our biggest ask is that if anybody out there is not aligning with us or working with us or has questions, give us a call.
Reach out.
Happy to share some information. Would love to get everybody included. And I think just stay tuned. We're very hopeful to see some wonderful things moving forward. I think and know that our state is very well positioned for some great success. And I'm seeing tremendous excitement around all of the groups I mentioned and more on rowing together in a common direction to get things done.
Absolutely.
So if anybody wants to know what we're up to, abq.org.
See you later.
All right, thanks.